introduce our speaker again for those who were not here last night. We welcome all of you to this talk on the Shroud. Last night was a big success, so this will be the last talk of the weekend. Today's speaker, his name is Russ Breault, has been researching and lecturing on the Shroud of Turin for over 30 years. His highly acclaimed presentation, known as Shroud Encounter, has been seen by over 1,000 audiences throughout the United States and Canada. He has presented to numerous colleges and universities, including Duke, Johns Hopkins, UMass, West Point, Penn State, Cal State, and churches of all denominations. Russ Breault has appeared in several nationally televised documentaries, including Mysteries of the Ancient World on CBS. He was both advisor and a primary expert for the highly acclaimed The Real Face of Jesus, a 2-hour documentary on the History Channel. He has also appeared in numerous other documentaries seen on the Discovery Channel and EWTN, and was an advisor to CNN's series Finding Jesus. He has also been an expert guest on Good Morning America and the World News Tonight. He was an advisor to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. for the development of the world-class exhibit that opened on February 26, 2022. He was a primary speaker for the opening session. He has participated in numerous international research symposiums since 1981 and was a keynote speaker for the last 3 academic conferences. He has personally observed and analyzed the Shroud during several public expeditions in Turin, Italy. He is a longtime member of the Shroud Science Group, an international consortium on scientists and the scholars dedicated to further research. Russ Breault is the president and founder of the Shroud of Turin Education Project, with a simple 11-word mission statement to advance the knowledge of the Shroud to a new generation. So please welcome again Russ Breault.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, Maria, again in the background and in the back there for helping all this happen. And how many of you were here last night? Raise your hands. Okay, y'all do this now. Just kidding. You know, I don't usually say y'all, but it kind of slipped out being from Atlanta. You know, so now this is, we're going to cover a little bit of what we did last night, but we're going to go into a whole bunch of new territory. And then, of course, I am Russ Breault from Atlanta, Georgia, and Coca-Cola, Chick-fil-A, Delta, Home Depot, and I'm going to change it up, where 55 streets have the name Peachtree in it. Now, can you imagine using your GPS in Atlanta if you happen to live on Peachtree anything? It's not good. The name of the presentation tonight is called Secrets of the Man Clothed in Linen. And we're going to look at the prophetic meaning of the Turin Shroud. We're going to look at these verses. We're going to look at verses in Ezekiel, Daniel, and also a lot of verses in Isaiah. And I think you're going to be surprised. Of course, let's do a little bit of a review. The Shroud of Turin, meaning Turin, Italy, which is a city in the northern part of the country, a pretty good sized city, about the size of Buffalo or Syracuse, I suppose. And it's, you can see, now because it's in the northern part of the city, it's also why you see the Italian side of the Alps here, which is why it was the home of the 2006 Winter Olympics, the home of Fiat Motor Works. And of course, it is also where this cathedral is, right here, which is called the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, built, or completed, shall I say, in 1694. And of course, in this cathedral is a mysterious cloth with a mysterious image on it. And for hundreds of years, people have been making pilgrimages to Turin during an exhibition to get a glimpse of this cloth. And so the shroud was on exhibit only 5 times in the 20th century, and of course, we're going to talk about what happened in 1978. We'll go over that. But during an exhibition, you can see the cloth above the altar behind bulletproof glass, but you can only stay up close here for just a couple minutes, and then you have to sit, and then you can sit in the back for as long as you want, but up close, just for a couple minutes, you have to move along. So let's just see what the shroud actually shows. Of course, right here, over here, is a life-size photo replica of the shroud. Now that is a photograph that is printed on cotton canvas, so it's not linen, and it's so let me just show you here. Up here, we'll look up here. And so if you were to see the shroud on display, you'd see it it would be horizontal as you see it here. You look at the center of the cloth and you look to your left and you'll see the front image of a man. You see the hair, the face, the arms, the hands, and then we see the legs. You look at the center of the cloth again, look to your right. You see the back of the head, the shoulders, the back of the legs here, and feet to the far right. Now, presuming that the cloth is authentic, then this is how we would think Jesus was probably wrapped in the cloth. He was laid on this portion of the cloth here, with this portion wrapped over him lengthwise, such as we see here in this diagram. And so now if you turn it vertical, a lot easier to understand what you're looking at now. Clearly we see the image of a man with the hair, the face, the blood all into the forehead, all into the hair. We see the arms, blood on the arms here. We see the hands. We see the nail wound in the wrist here, and we see the legs. We see some blood down here by the feet. And as I mentioned last night, the shroud was in a fire in 1532. It was kept in a silver box. The top of the box melted, and a glob of molten silver fell down onto the cloth, burning all the way through it, creating a series of 8 burns. And so here we see 4 of them here, and these are burns, and these triangular shapes are patches. So burns and patches, and these lines are scorch marks. So the image lies in between these parallel lines, which are nothing more than burns and patches and scorch marks. And during the fire, it was doused with water. So we have a pattern of water stains. The water stain over the knees here, over here, over the chest, above the head. And so just so you have an understanding of everything that you're looking at here. Now, right adjacent to this patch is a side wound with blood flowing down from it. So here's the wound, and there's blood flowing down from it. So now it's interesting, if you Google the shroud or look at a book or a magazine, you'll always see the face image. And sometimes you see the full frontal image. What you almost never see is that this is a front and back image of an apparently about a 6 foot, 5'10" to 6 foot crucified man. Scrapes and blood flows all around the back of the head from an apparent crown of thorns. We see scourge marks crisscrossing the body in 2 directions, from the base of the neck all the way down to the ankles. We see blood across the small of the back here from that side wound. We see the back of the left leg here, with the bottom of the left foot with 2 exit wounds for 2 nails, blood trailing off from this upper wound, and there's a second exit wound here. Here's the back of the right leg, somewhat elevated above the left leg, with the bottom of the right heel, as if one foot was placed upon the other. Are you getting any feedback? Yes. I think maybe if I pull this back, pull it away from that speaker. Is that any better? Yes. Yes? Okay, I have a yes. Do I have more than one yes? Yes. It's unanimous? Okay, good. So, all right. Look, there he goes. Okay. Is that good? Does that mean I can move this up now? Oh, don't tempt fate. So, okay. Now, so let's talk about what happened in 1978. 1978, you had a whole team of scientists go to Turin, 33 scientists. They have access to the cloth for 5 days and nights, and this is working in shifts around the clock, 120 hours, and The result of their work was published in 24 different peer-reviewed journal articles. They did chemical analysis, blood analysis, image analysis, textile analysis, and the conclusion of the Shroud Project is this, and this is rendered in 1981. We can conclude for now that the Shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The blood stains are composed of hemoglobin and give a positive test for serum albumin. So, the plot certainly thickens now. And so, let me just go again, let me just go over some of the highlights that will be in it, because most of you saw all this last night. You know, one of the most important conclusions of the Shroud Project is that there's no visible trace of any kind of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, or stain. There are no artistic substances on the cloth to account for the image. Now, you know, in this, as I mentioned last night, that's a very important thing to think about, because there is this either-or proposition. It either is or it isn't. And if it's not authentic, then what is it? Well, then it must be the work of an artist. It must be the work of a human effort in some way, shape, or form. And so, but we can't determine any substances that were used by the artist, nor can we determine any process that this alleged artist used. Now, this is called transmitted light photography. It is the last test that they did in 1978, before they had to pack their bags and come back to the States. And so they had a steel table that they brought over there that they could break apart in individual panels that allow you to put a light in back of the shroud to transmit light through the shroud. And so in transmitted light, well, let's look at the one on your left. Now this is just standard reflected light. We clearly see the image. We see there it is. But in transmitted light, there's a light kind of in the back of the head here. We see the wound in the side here. We see the blood on the arms. We see the water stain over the knees. We see some blood down here by the feet. We see some kind of horizontal banding from the way that the shroud was woven. But the image is gone. You don't see the image. And that's because there's no trace of any kind of substances on the cloth to account for the image. If there were, you would see it just the same way you see the water stain or the blood stains, but you don't. And all this does is visually confirm what we already were just talking about. So now let's look at some photomicroscopy. On your left, this is rust magnified. This is a area where the cloth was tainted with some rust from an old tack. And so no problem seeing the rust particles clinging to the threads and the fibers. On your right over here is a charred area. No problem seeing a burned thread there and a thread that's perfectly intact right next to it. On your left is a blood image area from the lower back. No problem seeing the blood soaking through and clinging to all the threads and the fibers. On your right is an image area from the tip of the nose, one of the darkest parts of the shroud image, and you can hardly tell that anything is even there. You have to drill down several hundred times magnification in order to see that. And I did that last night. The beginning, so there's no substances on the cloth to account for the image. The beginning of the scientific investigation really began well over 100 years ago when it was photographed for the very first time. And the image on your left, as the image as it occurs on the cloth itself. The image on your right is the image as it occurs in a photographic negative. And there's a transformation that takes place that should not logically take place. Now I know, so in other words, on your left, which is on the cloth itself, it's kind of vague and blurry and indistinct. On your right, in the photo negative, it becomes much clearer, much more pronounced, much more lifelike in the photo negative. Now, as I mentioned last night, you know, how many of you remember taking pictures with film? Okay, all right, good. So you remember you had your 35 millimeter camera, and you take your film canister down to Kmart or something, get your pictures back, and in the back of the pictures is a little sleeve of negatives, and you hold it up to the light and you say, who is that? I mean, you have to develop it to see what's on that photo negative. So why then does the image look so much clearer in the negative? Well, the only explanation is that the image that's on the cloth on your left must be a negative image to start with. Therefore, what shows up in a photonegative is actually a positive image. I mean, that's pretty strange. And then when you look at the full body image in the photonegative, I mean, that looks like an X-ray. And over here, next to the replica, are two 50% scale photonegative images. And you can take a look at those later and see how much more detail you see in the negative. Now, this interesting phenomenon with the shroud, and I showed you this last night. This is a portrait artist, and his name is Tyshan Schoenberg, and he's from Great Britain. I just have him up here because he allowed me to use his pictures. And but I want to show you the difference. The closer you get to the shroud, the less detail you see. To the point where if you get closer than 6 feet, it disappears. You can't see it. You have to stand back from it in order to see it. Now, that's not true with this replica, because this is a photograph printed on cotton canvas. But with the actual shroud itself, if you get closer than 6 feet, it disappears. And yet, the closer you get to a painting, the more detail you see. So we're going to go close up on this portrait. You can see what I'm talking about. So we go close up, and you see the different brush strokes, you see the different densities, you see the different colors. Clearly, this is the work of an artist. And yet you go to the shroud, nothing. Back to a painting, back to the shroud, nothing. And so now, we'll look at just a portion of a single thread. This is magnified several hundred times magnification. We see some yellowing on the top 1 to 2 microfibers of the cloth. This is one of the intriguing things, is that the image is so superficial that it only affects the top 1 to 2 microfibers. It does not penetrate through the cloth. The blood penetrates all the way through, the water stains penetrate all the way through, and the burns burn all the way through. But the image is purely superficial on the inside surface of the cloth. So in other words, the best explanation that we have for why this is occurring is that it seems to be the result of an accelerated dehydration and oxidation of the cellulose fibers composing the linens, but only in those areas immediately surrounding the body. So in other words, it is essentially a discoloration of the cloth with something having interacted with those cellulose fibers. So now we're going to do the laundry list like I did last night, and so we summarized everything about what we know about the image and the blood and the cloth itself. It's superficial, penetrates only the top 2 microfibers. There's no directionality, such as with brush strokes. There's no outline to the image. There's no cementing of the fibers as with paint. It's uniform in intensity, top to bottom, front to back. I think you need a piece of technology to do something like that. And there's no variations in density as with known artworks. We saw an example. There's no particles in between the threads, such as a dust rubbing. There's no capillary action, nothing to suggest that liquids were applied to the image to bring forth the image. There's no paint binder present, nothing to bind any substance to the cloth. It's a negative image with distance information encoded. It's blood from actual wounds. It's AB blood type with human male DNA. We found that out in 1995. And there's no image under the blood. We talked about that last night. There's no image under the blood, which is a very interesting, it's a very important observation because that tells you something. That tells you the order of events. If there's no image under the blood, then that means the blood was on the cloth first, followed by the image. So when did the image get there? I don't know. I got a hunch. Maybe 3 days later, but all I know is that the blood was on the cloth first, followed by the image, which makes sense if it's authentic, Good Friday followed by Easter Sunday, but it makes no sense if it's the work of an artist. And in fact, there's been about a half a dozen attempts by various people to show how some alleged artist could have crafted the image, and they create their copy. Most of them are pretty terrible, and there's a couple that look good from a distance, but they all break down under the microscope, and they all make the same mistake. They craft their image and they just paint the blood where it's supposed to go. No, no, no. Blood first, then image. You do that, and you've accomplished something. And so now when you look at this frontal image on your left, dorsal image on your right, this is phenomenal. It stands alone. It is singular and unique in human history. Now the historical trail would indicate that there was a mysterious cloth that was taken to Edessa by Saint Jude, and King Abgar V was the king of the city-state of Edessa. He was dying of leprosy and wanted and sent a messenger to ask Jesus to come back and bring healing to him. Well, obviously Jesus had other plans, and he sent a messenger back along with the apostle Jude, who brings a cloth with him with a mysterious image on it. Well, Abgar beholds this image. He's healed of leprosy, and he becomes a believer. And so Jude is connected with this whole story. Now, we're not going to go over all that again, but just to understand how the shroud probably got to Edessa circa 1st century, is there until 944 when it's taken to Constantinople, and then in 1204 it's stolen by the French during the Fourth Crusade, goes underground for a while, reappears in Lorraine, France in 1356, moves to Chambéry, France in 1450, ultimately to Turin in 1578. Now this is the probable historical trail. Now, we talked last night about carbon dating. I'm going to mention a couple of things, but we're not going to belabor it because I spent about 15 minutes on it last night. And so in 1988, it was carbon dated by 3 different carbon dating labs, and they said, no, it can't be. It has a date range of 1260 to 1390, so, that's in. Let's go. And then, but unfortunately, what no one tells you about is how they violated the sampling protocol. They were supposed to cut 3 different samples from 3 different locations on the cloth. They didn't do that. They cut 1 sample from the outside corner edge, exactly where it had been held and handled hundreds of times over the centuries. So in other words, let me go back to this slide. This is the general area that was cut for carbon dating, right here. Now, these are etchings, dozens of etchings, showing how people were holding up the shroud manually like this during public exhibitions. And I put this big red arrow here to draw your attention to that corner. And in fact, we know historically that it was handheld just like this over 275 times from 1418 until 1694. So if you were looking for the worst possible sample location, you would pick from one of the 2 outside corners, which of course is what they did. Now I'm not going to belabor all the other reasons why we know the carbon date is wrong, but here's the most recent one, announced last week. And the scientists in Italy been working with something called wide-angle X-ray scattering. And what this does, it looks at a single fiber and can assess the amount of deterioration and decay in that fiber. And they compare the amount of deterioration and decay in fibers from the shroud versus fibers from other linens from today, 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old, all the way back to 5,000 years ago. And the only sample that had the comparable amount of deterioration and decay, that sample was taken from Masada circa 1st century. Okay, we're going to keep going now. They're signaling to me. Okay. Now, I want to talk about something that I didn't talk about last night, but also relates to the whole dating issue. Now, you know that in John's Gospel, it talks about, well, here it is right here. Then Peter saw the linen cloth lying, and the napkin which had been on his head, not lying on the linen cloths, but rolled up in a place by itself. Now, I kind of jumped over this last night, but today we're going to deal with it. And this is called the Sudarium of Oviedo, which is in Oviedo, Spain. And this is a small cloth about the size of a small bath towel, about 20 by 30 inches. It is, and it is documented to the early 7th century, 614 in fact, is when it was brought from Jerusalem to Spain. Now, this, it is linked to the shroud by blood type. They both have AB blood type. It is there's a 94% correlation with the bloodstain patterns. And there's also, they have pollens that are common to both on the shroud and the sudarium, pollen from the Holy Land. And now, on this napkin of the sudarium, there is no image. It's just a cloth covered with blood and pleural effusion. And so it was wrapped around the head, it was wrapped around the face of Jesus after he died, but before he was removed from the cross. And so there would have been a tradition to cover the face of the dead, but it's also very much a Jewish thing to collect any blood, because blood had to remain with the body. And it was removed from the face, rolled up, placed next to the body, before the body was then wrapped in the burial shroud. But it's kept with the body because it had blood on it. That cloth would not have remained on his face. The only other cloth that would have been allowed to remain on his face would be the Jewish talit, or the Jewish prayer cloth, but that was probably stolen by the Romans. Remember, they cast lots for his garments. And so now on the sudarium, there's no image. We see 1 part blood and 6 parts pleural effusion. Now, what does that mean? In the ordeal of crucifixion, of the massive scourging and being crucified and hanging up there on the cross, the lungs eventually fill up with pleural fluid, and so this is what then escapes as they move the body. There is this pleural effusion, this stuff that comes out of the mouth and the nose as they move this body. It's pretty disgusting, but that's what is on this cloth. And it also tells you something. It tells you that this cloth was involved with the crucifixion. And then, so again, there are patterns that match, that we can see fingerprints even, where the cloth was held to the face. It's kept in the Cathedral of San Salvador in Oviedo, Spain. And this is the cathedral. And this is the reliquary that it's kept in. What's the significance then? Is that the shroud and the sudarium were in the same place at the same time. And the shroud, therefore, dates at least to the 7th century, because this cloth has a documented history beginning in Spain in 614. And that's 600 years older than the oldest carbon date. But there's also something else I want to mention that involves the sudarium, and that is a biblical principle. And this is talked about in Deuteronomy, 19:15. It says that the truth of a matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay, now watch this. Every miracle Jesus did had eyewitnesses. Everything. Except the resurrection. There's a reason, because it was a big stone put in front of the entrance. But however, it would seem that something as significant as the resurrection would require 2 or 3 witnesses. But there are no witnesses. At least no human witnesses. So the question is not who are the witnesses, but what are the witnesses? And so the first witness has to be the empty tomb. And the first thing anyone ever does when they go to Jerusalem is go to the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre. And maybe some people believe it was the garden tomb. It doesn't matter. Is that the empty tomb is the first piece of evidence that Jesus had risen from the dead. What's the second witness? The second witness has to be the linen cloth lying there. the vacant burial shroud. But there's something as significant as the resurrection, that's going to call for 3 witnesses. So what's the 3rd witness? The Sudarium of Oviedo, the napkin. There are your 3 witnesses. The tomb, the shroud, and the napkin. God does not violate his word. And the amazing thing about this is that human witnesses would all be dead, but these witnesses, all 3 of them, testify even today. Well, you know, like we talked about last night, thousands of people were crucified. How do you know it's Jesus? Well, you know, we don't have the DNA of Jesus. We have the DNA of the man that's on the shroud, but we don't know for a fact that that's Jesus. So we're going to have to apply something else, and that's called, and that would be a forensic medical analysis. You know, would we examine those who have died from physical trauma, and usually to determine, you know, the identity or the cause of death. So from a forensic standpoint, let's look at it real quick. Crown of thorns, singular mockery for the man who claimed to be king of the Jews. No one ever, that we know of, received the crown of thorns as a routine of crucifixion. Severely scourged. Why was he scourged so badly? Because Pontius Pilate didn't want to kill him. And so he had him scourged tremendously, so hoping he wouldn't have to kill him. But they still called out for his crucifixion. Nails in the wrist, nails in the feet. Legs not broken. We talked about that. Why were the legs not broken? Because when they came to Jesus, he was already dead. Therefore, they did not break his legs. But both thieves are still alive. They broke both of their legs. Why? To bring on this process of asphyxia, the inability to breathe. But instead of breaking his legs, they stabbed him in the side with a spear. Here's the side wound. Right here. This is blood flowing down from it. This clear area in here is a separation of blood and blood serum. And of course, we looked at this. These are Egyptian burial tunics. There's 75 of these in the Museum of Cairo. And the common denominator is they all have swirling stains of decomposition, where the body decomposed through the cloth. There's no stains of decomposition on the Shroud of Turin. So in terms of the identity of the man, you do the math. Now let's look at the theology of linen. You know, linen has a significant meaning from Genesis all the way to Revelation. Jesus begins his life wrapped in swaddling clothes and ends it in a burial shroud. His life is bookended with linen. Now, interestingly, the shroud is fine, twisted linen. Here's what the scripture says. There came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, and he took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud. Other translations say fine linen shroud. To say it's clean means it's ritually clean. It was woven on a loom that would do either cotton or flax, not wool. You can't mix animal and plant. So you have to, in any wool that does, in any loom that does wool, it can only do wool. And it's so that would suggest that it was ritually clean according to Jewish requirements. But it's also made of a 3-to-1 herringbone pattern weave with a Z twist that would suggest that it would be considered fine twisted linen. And here we see an example of it here. This would be a standard plain weave, a 1-to-1 pattern weave down here, the backing cloth. But the shroud is a very distinctive 3-to-1 herringbone pattern weave. Now, why is this significant? Is because Moses was commanded to make the tabernacle of the 10 curtains, the tabernacle in the wilderness with curtains made of fine twisted linen. Aaron and his sons, they made tunics of fine linen. David, where it says David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, as were all of the Levites who were carrying the ark. The angels in Revelation, hasn't happened yet. The 7 angels who were holding the bowls of the 7 plagues came from the temple, clothed in spotless white linen. And now this is talking about us. Get excited about this. For the wedding of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. Fine linen, bright and clean, was given to her to wear. And it says, fine linen stands for the righteous acts of the saints. So linen, all through the scripture, represents the holiness of God or the righteousness of the saints. Now it's interesting. Why did Joseph of Arimathea purchase a cloth made of fine, twisted linen? Who was Joseph? He was one of the Sanhedrin. This is the ruling body of Israel. He was connected with the temple. He had access to the temple store. Did he purchase a cloth made of fine, twisted linen to send a message? Did he purposely wrap Jesus in linen worthy of a high priest about to enter the Holy of Holies? Remember, book of Hebrews, Jesus has become our high priest who ever lives to make intercession for us. Now, the shroud also fulfills biblical prophecy found in Isaiah. This is from Isaiah 25:6. Now, 6, 7, and 8 are all prophecies regarding when God finally puts an end to death. The death itself is destroyed. So this is a future event. On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples. Not Jews, just all peoples, everybody. And it says, a banquet of aged wine with the best of meats and the finest of wines. So we're talking about a big banquet of all peoples. Now, what's the next thing on the church calendar is going to be the marriage supper of the Lamb, which is written about in Revelation. And we are all invited. Now, verse 7, 25:7. On this mountain, that means God's holy mountain. This is where God dwells. He says, on this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all people, the sheet that covers all nations. There is a shroud of death that covers the entire earth. Everything dies. Everything eventually dies. But did you know that death was never meant was never meant to be? Adam and Eve were created as eternal beings. Death entered when sin entered. And so there is this shroud of death that has covered the earth. And so Jesus, if he's going to be our substitute, he had to be wrapped in a linen shroud. Now watch this last one. And then verse 8, it says, he will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all of the faces. He will remove the people's disgrace from all the earth. The Lord has spoken. So I want to go back to this one here. In other words, it says, the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations, says he will destroy that. How do you destroy it? You destroy its purpose. No one ever escapes their shroud. No one ever escapes their coffin. But Jesus did. And in so doing, he destroyed the power of death. Now, this verse is fulfilled in 1 Corinthians 15. It says, when this is Paul referencing the resurrection of all believers at the end of the age, he says, when the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. He's referencing this exact verse, which we just read right here. This is the fulfillment of it. So, to understand what this means is to understand that the scripture talks about substitutionary atonement. Jesus is our substitute. Jesus had to be wrapped in a burial shroud, and he had to defeat its power. So when you look at the shroud, you see the whole pattern of bloodstains. That represents death, but the image represents life. So you have both occur concurrently on the cloth. And they're two entirely separate processes. Whatever caused the pattern of bloodstains, which is direct contact with the body, is completely separate from the cause of the image. The cause of the bloodstains is death. The cause of the image is life. Now let's talk about the secrets of the man clothed in linen. Now, there's a little bit of background on this. So, I present at churches of all denominations. In fact, here's a picture of global Christianity. The blue is Catholic, the red is Protestant, and the gray is Orthodox, and the 1% is other. And I don't know, I've never lectured at other before. But I lecture, I present at Catholic all the time, Protestant all the time, and every once in a while Orthodox. And it's and so as such, I was invited a few years ago to present at an evangelical prophecy conference. And the reason they invited me is because my position is that the shroud represents a future event. And it's, I think the shroud image is a snapshot, a photograph of what is going to happen to all of us at some point in the future. Get ready and get excited about that. And so I began, but I've been presenting to them for several years. And they always want new material, and because they video it and then they sell the DVDs, it's kind of a fundraiser, so they're always looking for new material. So I've been with them several times, and they asked me to come out again, and I had nothing new to offer. I had already done. I was tapped out. I had nothing new to share, and so I'm sitting there with the Bible in my hand, and I said, Lord, you're going to have to help me out on this one. And so you know how you randomly open the Bible to see? I was just randomly open the Bible, and it opens to Ezekiel chapter 9. And I began reading about the man clothed in linen. Well, you know, sometimes when you read the word, things just jump off of the page at you. Well, that's what happened to me. That jumped off the page, and I said, I can't believe it. That's it. I don't know how it's it, but I knew that was it. And so I turned in the title to my presentation. I was going to say, I'm going to do a lecture on secrets of the man clothed in linen, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And so I began to research. I began to look at this, because I kind of felt that this was a God thing, that God was telling me, this is it. And so I began to explore it. So now let's look. That this man clothed in linen appears only 2 times in Scripture. In Ezekiel chapter 9 and Daniel chapter 12. So let's look at it. It says this, beginning in 9 verse 2 in Ezekiel. I saw 6 men, angels, coming from the direction of the upper gate, which faces the north. That usually represents heaven. Each with a deadly weapon in his hand. And with them was a man clothed in linen, who had a writing kit, an inkhorn at his side. And they came in and stood beside the bronze altar. And then he says this, in Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 3. Then the Lord called to the man clothed in linen, who had the writing kit with the inkhorn at his side, and said to him, Go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all of the detestable things that are done in it. Okay, follow me? So he's told to go and go throughout all of them. Now Jerusalem, just a little preview, is about to be judged. They have fallen into complete depravity. But there were a few that held on to their faith, that were the faithful remnant. And those are the ones that he said for this man clothed in linen to go and mark on their foreheads. Now I'm saying, and so I'm saying to myself, how does this relate to the shroud? And then I began to think about this. Well, you know, here in the shroud image, you have this front and back image of a 5'10" to 6' man, and the most prominent feature of the whole shroud has to be the face, and yet the most prominent feature on the face is this blood stain right in the middle of the forehead. And I got to thinking, oh my goodness. Jesus is marked on his own forehead with his own blood. Now watch this. So when you look at the natural image, it looks like an epsilon. But when you flip it in the photo negative, it looks like a 3. Because that's what happens when you film, not with digital, but when you convert the negative using film, it flips. And I'm saying to myself, well, who grieves and laments more than anybody over the sins of mankind? It would be Jesus himself, the one who gave his life for us. And so let's keep going here. And this is in Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 5 and 6, it says, as I listened, he said to the others, this gets tough, follow him to the city. I mean, follow the man clothed with linen. Follow him and kill without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter the old men, the young men, the women, the mothers, and the children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark on the forehead. Begin right here at my sanctuary, in my temple. So they began with the old men who were in front of the temple. That's some rough stuff. That's what Ezekiel was seeing in the spirit. But what was happening in the physical? In the physical, the Babylonian army was invading from Babylon, or from modern-day Iraq, and the temple was destroyed. They breached the walls of the city, and they kill thousands, and they take a remnant back to Babylon as slaves. That becomes known as the Babylonian captivity. Who was it who was brought back to Babylon as slaves, including the prophet Daniel? These were the people that were marked on the foreheads. And so, saying, well, okay, that's interesting. So now let's look at Daniel 12:2 at the end of the age. Now this is the only other time in which this man clothed in linen shows up. And he says, at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Okay, now let's wait a minute now. I'm assuming that whose names is written in the book, that correlates with the Lamb's book of life written in the book of Revelation. So we have the promise here. So the promise in Ezekiel, those who are marked on the forehead will be spared. Those whose names are written in the book, they will be spared. But watch when this man clothed in linen shows up. He only shows up at times of judgment. So, in other words, it's the judgment of Jerusalem in 586 BC, and it's the judgment of the world at the end of the age. Now Daniel goes on, and he says, then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on the bank of the river, and one on the opposite bank. These are angels. And one of them said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river. Well, who else walks on the water? And how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? This is Daniel is asking the man clothed in linen. So we would see that this is a pre-incarnate Christ figure, is what we're seeing here. This man clothed in linen. The verse goes on and he says, he replied, the man clothed in linen replied, he says, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified and made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. And so it's going to be sealed up until the time of the end. What's sealed up? So in other words, knowledge of what this is happening here is going to be revealed. This is about 2,500 years ago. So knowledge of what he's talking about will be revealed at some point in the future. I'm presuming either through technology or by world events. So now let's look at this. The man clothed in linen only appears twice in Scripture: at the judgment of Jerusalem in 586 BC, and at the judgment of the world at the end of the age. And he is described by what he wore, the man clothed in linen. And yet all of the commentaries say that this is a Jesus showing up in the Old Testament. Now the New Testament doesn't describe what Jesus wore in life, except maybe one reference to him wearing a seamless cloak. But all four Gospels tell us exactly what he wore in death: fine, clean linen. So he's not the man clothed in linen. He's the man wrapped in linen. In life, Jesus did not come to bring judgment, not the first time. He extended love and kindness. He offered compassion and grace. He showed mercy and forgiveness. He came to die in our place as our substitute, the ultimate act of mercy. The man clothed in linen, how does this relate to Jesus then? Remember, I'm trying to figure this out because I know God has something here. So how does this relate to Jesus and the shroud? You see, I got to thinking, is that all of God's judgment against sin was hurled at his own son on the cross. In other words, Jesus was judged in our place and died for our sins. If the man clothed in linen only shows up at times of judgment, well, the cross is all about judgment. It's judging Jesus in our place instead of us. So again, Jesus is the man wrapped in linen and left that linen in the tomb as a witness for all time. So when you look at the doctrine or the concept of substitutionary atonement, here's a verse from Isaiah. He says, all of us have become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous acts are like filthy rags. And yet his clean linen garment became an unclean, blood-stained, filthy rag for us. Substitution. Jesus is our substitute. And then again, we see it here. Fine linen, the fine linen, his fine linen shroud became a filthy rag so that we can be given his garment of righteousness in exchange. And here's a verse from Isaiah 61:10. He has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me with a robe of his righteousness. That is such a big concept. Do you understand that we in the future will be clothed with a robe of his righteousness and not our own? You do not want to stand in front of a holy God robed in your own righteousness. No. That's not going to be a good day. You need to be robed in his righteousness, which he gives to us by faith. Now watch this. The blood is the power of transformation. So in Isaiah 1:18, it says this, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. And though they are as red like crimson, they shall be as wool. And have you ever wondered why the color of sin is red and not gray or black or something like that? It's because red is the color of blood. And blood is what reverses the power of sin. Watch what happens when we reverse the shroud. All of your bloodstains become white. White as snow. Same exact thing. All of the messianic prophecy of the entire crucifixion account is found in Isaiah 1:6. This is amazing. This is, now I want you to pay, as I read this, I want you to pay, now right here, we've painted in blood, all where the blood is, all the scourge marks, the crown of thorns, and the wounds in the feet. Now, in this Isaiah 1:6, Isaiah is describing the sins of Israel, really the sins of the world, but in this case, he is talking to Israel. He's describing the sins of Israel as if Israel was a man. And this is what he says. From the sole of your foot to the top of your head, there is no soundness, only wounds and welts and open sores, not cleansed or bandaged or soothed with oil. Look at that again. Look at this. Look at this down here. From the sole of your foot to the top of your head, crimped by a crown of thorns, and 120 scourge marks in between, there is no soundness, only wounds and welts and open sores, not cleansed or bandaged or soothed with oil. So, this is how Israel is being, the sins of Israel are described. Now watch how this is fulfilled in the New Testament. In 2 Corinthians 5:21 it says, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. So in other words, ask this question. What does it look like for Jesus to become sin? This is it, right here. We just told us in Isaiah 1:6, and it's exactly what we see on the shroud. Now I gotta tell you this. this whole thing gets even crazier with how the Lord was giving me this Secrets of the Man Clothed in Linen. My daughter lives near Pittsburgh. She's very much strong in her faith and very much into the Word. And I was explaining to her on the phone what I was working on. That, you know, Ezekiel and how the bloodstain flipped to a 3 and all that stuff. And then she said, well, that explains it. I said, what do you mean that explains it? And I said, well, I had a dream last week and I couldn't understand what it meant. And I said, and so I asked her she explained it to me, and I said, listen, you got to put that in an email and send it to me. And this is what she wrote me. Now this is a dream that she got a week prior to when I was working on this and explaining it to her. She said this: in my dream, my mother-in-law knocks on my door. I open it. She's standing there with a big pot of alphabet soup. We don't talk. We just take the soup up to my room and dump the whole pot of soup out on my bed. Good thing this is a dream, right? We sift through all of the letters and the numbers until we spell out Ezekiel and the number 3. We both say that this means something, but we don't know what. I knew in my dream that Ezekiel and 3 were related to one another, but I also knew it wasn't referencing Ezekiel chapter 3, and she's right. It's chapter 9. What she was referencing is the blood stain on the forehead. And I'm saying, now how cool is that? When she's, man, you know how you get goosebumps and the hair comes up on the end? And so I said, oh my goodness, the Lord is saying something here. And it's, and so, I mean, I was just blown away by that. So when you look at the prophecy of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 9, it says, the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end. Now, I presume that things are going to be revealed either through technology or through world events. We're going to understand these things that were sealed up. Now, modern cursive Hebrew began in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was developed in Germany. So this was a whole new cursive alphabet that the Jews were working on in Germany to replace the old one. And it's interesting then, so I had a friend of mine who's knowledgeable in all things Hebrew, and I sat down for lunch with him, and I had brought my laptop with him and showed him this presentation, and then and so he says, well, it could be a 3, because that's what I was thinking, it was a sign of the Trinity. But he says, well, it could be more. I said, what do you mean it could be more? Well, he says, well, it could be a Hebrew dalet, not a dalet, a sadeh. I said, what's a sad? It's the 18th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. A sadeh is it means, I asked him what it means. He says it means righteous one. And it's used to spell the name Melchizedek. If you know anything about Melchizedek in Genesis, Jesus is described as a priest in the order of Melchizedek. So when you look at this, symbol here, compare it with a Hebrew sadeh, that pretty well compares. And so so I'm saying to myself, righteous one, my goodness, I mean, bells are going off everywhere. I'm saying to myself, is that the mark that was put on the foreheads in Ezekiel of all those who mourn and lament over all the detestable things that were going on? Is that what the symbol was? And so, could this be the very name of God himself? Righteous one. And it's interesting, in Revelations 22:4, it says, they will see his face, and his name will be on their forehead. Wait. They means we. So in other words, we will see his face. His name will be on our foreheads. What's his name? Righteous one. We have become righteous. We have put on his robe of righteousness. We're made righteous because of what he accomplished for us on the cross, right? So, in other words, is that the mark that's going to be? Are we going to get a Hebrew sadeh right here on our foreheads? I don't know. I'm You see, because from Ezekiel, anyone who has the mark of God will be spared. And from Daniel, anyone whose name is found written in the book of life will be delivered. So, I just have one thing to say to you. Rejoice in the promise of your faith, because you and I will both stand in front of a holy God, robed in His righteousness, not our own, and His name will be on our forehead. And I have a hunch. Now remember, we make the sign of the cross on the forehead, but His name is not the cross. His name is something else. His name is Righteous One. I have a sense that it might be a Hebrew Sadeh that we get on our foreheads. And that's it. Thank you very much.